So I just watched this mini documentary called The Cost of Cobalt. It's produced by Al Jazeera and it talks specifically about how in Katanga, the Katanga region of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, basically because of the inhalation and constant contact with cobalt, coltan, and all of these different conflict minerals that humans aren't meant to inhale at any high capacity, it's leading to all kinds of birth defects, cancer, all sorts of long-term diseases. So not only are people being worked to death in the mines and being killed under, the oppression of different militant groups, all for the benefit of these, global but predominantly Western-centric tech companies, but they're being then infected with the toxic dust of having to mine these things by hand. We see this conversation also happening in Palestine, right? It's like it's not just the bomb as it drops that is the deadly part. Obviously, that is the most obviously deadly and horrific. But those clouds that are created, all of those metal particulates that people are breathing in the long term are going to cause cancer, birth defects, and all sorts of horrific things. The reason I wanted to bring your attention to this is because the framing that sometimes journalists, and I love Al Jazeera, but even Al Jazeera sometimes uses, it reminds me a lot of Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, in that they'll say coltan, like a necessary technological thing, or they'll say like cobalt, a necessary mineral for clean energy. In that framing, it absolves the stakeholders inflicting the harm. It absolves them of blame because it's saying, we have to do this. Like, this is what's required for phones. Like, this is what's required for your electric car. Just because a market exists in which people are willing to pay money that theoretically, yes, is better for the environment, I want to ask you, whose environment is it better for? Certainly not the people who are being worked to death in the mines. Certainly not their family members who are suffering from, think about the environment around those mines, the villages around those mines, the communities, the neighborhoods, all of those children who are going to be growing up with birth defects, who are going to be growing up with developmental defects because of the inhalants that are now in their toxic air. People whose siblings, mothers, fathers are crushed to death in those mine collapses, which happen super often. So ask yourself, whose environment is this for? Because it's just for the exploitation and benefit of the West. It's exploiting these workers and these people, stripping them of their lives and their dignity. In many parts of the country, forcing them at gunpoint to work. It's not just an economic scarcity thing. It's like there's literally militant groups propped up by Rwanda, propped up by France, the UK, the United States. But I reject this insidious framing that it's one of the horrific costs of doing business, because that frames it as something that's like an inevitable thing. It's not inevitable. These companies don't have to do this. These companies could be investing billions to make sure that all of their workers had proper attire, that they're having inhalant gas masks that protect them from the harmful substances. They could be making sure that they had proper gear and gloves so they're not having to crawl down into these mines often barefoot, I'm seeing in these videos, and we've learned about how cobalt exposure to the skin is literally toxic because you're not supposed to touch it directly to your skin, yet many of these children are being forced to mine with their bare hands. This is the fault of companies like Apple, Google, Tesla, Microsoft. It is the fault of governments who prop up military leaders in Rwanda who enable this. I just watched a whole documentary about how under Obama's leadership, there was a sweeping law passed that essentially said they would no longer fund any country that was caught engaging in egregious human rights violations in the Congo. People have put forth evidence after evidence after evidence, formalized reports put forth in the UN about Rwanda's human rights violations, the number of people they've killed, the number of people that Kagame has allowed to be murdered and slaughtered, and no one does anything. So these politicians that have funded these extreme leaders, that have turned a blind eye to these genocides, enact these pretend laws that they say they're going to use to help, but then they don't actually ever enforce them. Meanwhile, in the West and globally, the insatiable greed for technology, for laptops, computers, smartphones, electric cars, grows and grows and grows, because instead of just using one phone for many, many years, like, a normal person, we have this constant need to upgrade the phones. iPhone has the iPhone Forever program, so you're constantly upgrading a new phone. I mean, if the demand is literally, billions of people on Earth have these phones, and you're having to get a brand new one every single year, think about the human cost. It's the result of child slave labor, human exploitation, the forced labor of men, women, and children. And people who say, oh, well, this is one of the things that we need for clean energy future. Like, it's horrible, I agree, but it has to be done for clean energy. No, it doesn't. There are other ways to make electric cars. This isn't the only way. And there's other ways to make these mining practices extremely sustainable, to pay these workers fairly, for these companies to have tons of billions of dollars of investment in these local communities they have destroyed. It is sick and twisted to believe the propaganda that this is just how this happens, or this is how this has to happen. And while many news outlets are, Human Rights Reports, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all these different things, while they are acknowledging the severity of the human toll, they so rarely blame the multi-trillion-dollar stakeholders, because they always say they didn't know the full extent. Yes, they fucking do. When in 2019, there was a lawsuit from the kids who had literally died in this mine, facilitated by multi-international groups who are working with human rights lawyers, that in and of itself is proof. They're providing literally evidence of their dead children. And so for Microsoft and Apple, I'm reading these statements that they give back where they say, we totally condemn child mining. We would never do that. It's like, it doesn't fucking matter if you condemn it, if you allow it to continue to happen, and then you continue to purchase from supply chains that literally end in the exploitation of children. Like, it's just lip service. They even said that they wanted to have the lawsuit thrown out because they felt that it had no basis in reality. That's a direct quote from Microsoft. Like, these people are fucking sick. Like, that they would allow this to happen, that they are in full knowledge, because it's not like internal reports aren't constantly being brought to the attention of these multi-trillion-dollar companies. They're not blind. They can see the videos, they can see what's happening. Human rights activists have been raising the alarm about this for literally decades. It's willful ignorance, and then it's scapegoating, because at the moment they're called out for their behavior, they just say, oh my gosh, we didn't know. We're going to really try to be sustainable and divest from harmful supply chains. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go exploit people in India now. Like, that's so fucked. Please, please, please. I hope that learning about this more robustly, one, inspires you to take action, to raise awareness about this topic, to read books like Cobalt Red by Siddharth Kara, to read books like King Leopold's Ghost, to understand the devastating and long, impactful history that colonization and exploitation has had in the Congo, but then to go a step further and see who the governments and companies are that are allowing this to continue and who are making this 1,000 times worse. And I mean, watch the Crisis in the Congo documentary that I've shared many times, in which it really lays out very clearly the Clintons' culpability in this, about how the United States very much propped up Kagame. Please support organizations on the ground like Friends of the Congo. Please give to especially the aid organizations that are directly working with children. And please don't stop speaking about this, because what is shocking and horrifying is that more people have been killed in this conflict than the Holocaust. This is another thing. The fact that when you type in, you tag a video with silent Holocaust or silent genocide, and TikTok automatically assumes you're talking about the Holocaust of Jewish people, which is one of the most horrific things that's happened in human history. I'm not trying to denigrate it at all. But the fact that it's called the Holocaust when there are other Holocausts and other silent genocides happening constantly, and the way that Eurocentrifying happens to everything. It's like the colonization of language even. More people have died from this conflict and this Holocaust in the Congo than died even at the hands of the Nazis, yet nobody talks about it. How can that be? You claim to say things like, oh, Hitler was the most evil man alive. What about Paul Kagame, who's allowed the deaths of literally millions of people, who has directly led to the butchering of hundreds of thousands of refugees? Millions, it's fucking evil. But here's the thing, it's backed by multi-trillion-dollar companies and US foreign policy interests. I'm almost out of time, but please watch these documentaries. Please engage with these resources I'm sharing with you, and please speak up. This issue is really important.